My parents skipped my birthday dinner to comfort my sister-in-law over a flower arrangement. They sent me a text saying, "Keisha, you are not our priority right now." I read that message and smiled. I picked up my pen and left a note on the back of the bill. "Then do not expect me to be yours." That night, I stopped paying the mortgage on their 4-bedroom house. The next morning, I woke up to 62 missed calls. My name is Keisha, and at 34 years old, I am the chief financial officer of a major pharmaceutical supply chain in Atlanta. I manage budgets in the hundreds of millions and negotiate contracts that keep hospitals running. Yet to my family, I have never been anything more than a walking checkbook. If you have ever felt used by the people who are supposed to love you unconditionally, please hit that like button and subscribe. You are going to love how I handled this. The Capitol Grill is not the kind of place you go to eat alone. The mahogany paneling and the low lighting are designed for intimacy, for business deals, and for celebrations. I sat at table 42, a prime circular booth set for 6 people. The white tablecloth was pristine. The crystal wine glasses sparkled under the recessed lighting, but 5 of those chairs were empty. I checked my Cartier watch for the 10th time. 8:15. They were 2 hours and 15 minutes late. "Excuse me, miss." The waiter appeared again. His name tag said David, and he had been circling my table with a look of increasing pity for the last hour. "Would you like to order some appetizers while you wait? Maybe the calamari?" I forced a smile, though my jaw was tight. "No, thank you, David. They will be here any minute. My mother is never late for free food." But deep down, I knew. I looked around the room. To my left, a young couple was holding hands over a cheesecake. To my right, a group of businessmen were laughing. And here I was, the woman who paid for her parents' house, her brother's car, and her sister's-in-law wedding dress, sitting alone on her birthday. My phone buzzed on the white tablecloth. The screen lit up with a message from Mom. My heart jumped. Finally. They were probably just stuck in Atlanta traffic. I slid to unlock and read the message. The words hit me harder than a physical slap. "Do not wait for us. Becky is having a meltdown because the florist sent the wrong shade of peonies for the rehearsal dinner. She is crying and shaking. Your father and I have to stay here to calm her down. You are a grown woman, Keisha. You can eat alone. You are not our priority right now." I read it again. "You are not our priority right now." Becky, my brother's fiancée. The woman who had come into our family 3 years ago and somehow made everything about her. She was crying about flowers. And because of that, my parents, who I had supported for a decade, were abandoning me on the one day I asked for their time. I did not cry. I think I had cried enough tears over them in my 20s. This time, I felt something different. It was a cold, sharp clarity. It felt like the moment a bad investment is finally written off the books. "David," I called out. The waiter rushed over, looking relieved that I might finally leave. "Yes, miss. I am ready to order now, but I won't be needing the menu. I want the Camus Special Selection Cabernet, the 2016 vintage." David blinked. "The $800 bottle." "Yes. And bring me the bone-in ribeye. Rare. Are the others joining you?" "No, David." I looked him dead in the eye. "It is just me tonight. I am celebrating my freedom." When the wine came, I poured myself a full glass. It tasted like dark cherries and oak. It tasted like luxury. It tasted like the money I had been wasting on people who did not care if I existed. I ate my steak in silence, savoring every bite. When the bill came, it was for $940. I pulled out my black Amex, the heavy metal card that my brother Marcus loved to flash around whenever I let him borrow it. I paid the bill without flinching. Then I flipped the receipt over. I took a thick black Sharpie from my purse. My hand did not shake. I wrote in big block letters, "If I am not a priority, neither is your mortgage. Good luck with Becky." I pulled out my phone and took a photo of the note resting next to the empty bottle of expensive wine. I opened the family group chat named The Inner Circle. I attached the photo. Sent. Then before they could respond, I went to the group settings. Leave group. Confirm. But I was not done. I opened my Wells Fargo banking app. I logged in with Face ID. My balance stared back at me, healthy and substantial. I scrolled down to the recurring transfers section. There it was. Mom and Dad mortgage. $3,800. Scheduled for the 1st of the month. I tapped it. Cancel recurring payment. Confirm. Next line. Marcus allowance. $500. Cancel. Confirm. Next line. Parental utilities. Average $400. Cancel. Confirm. I watched the scheduled payments disappear from the screen one by one. In less than 30 seconds, I had just given myself a $4,700 a month raise. I felt lighter. I felt like I could fly. I stood up, smoothed down my silk dress, and walked out of the restaurant. The air outside was cool and crisp. I took my phone out one last time. I went to my contacts. Mom. Block caller. Dad. Block caller. Marcus. Block caller. And just for good measure, Becky. Block caller. I tossed my phone into my purse and signaled for the valet. I had a feeling tomorrow was going to be loud. But for tonight, the silence was beautiful. The morning sun hit the floor-to-ceiling windows of my midtown penthouse apartment at exactly 7 o'clock. Usually I woke up to the sound of my alarm and an immediate sense of anxiety checking my email for work emergencies or family crisis. But today was different. The silence in my apartment was absolute. I stretched my legs under the 600 thread count Egyptian cotton sheets and took a deep breath. It was the first time in 10 years I had woken up without a heavy weight on my chest. I rolled over and picked up my phone. The screen was flooded with notifications. 62 missed calls, 40 from my mother, 15 from my father, 7 from Marcus. There were dozens of text messages, but I could not read them because I had blocked their numbers the night before. The missed calls were just the digital ghosts of their panic. I scrolled through the list of red notifications with a strange sense of detachment. It looked like a digital tantrum. My mind drifted back to the day Marcus first introduced us to Becky 3 years ago. We were sitting in my parents' living room, the very room I had paid to have repainted the month before. Becky had walked in wearing shoes she clearly could not walk in, and a smile that did not reach her eyes. When Marcus introduced me, she did not shake my hand. Instead, she reached out and touched my hair. I flinched, but she did not pull back. "Oh, wow," she had said, her voice sickly sweet. "Is this natural? It is so fun, Keisha. But do you wear it like this for big meetings? I mean, isn't it a bit unprofessional for a CFO?" I remembered freezing, waiting for my mother to correct her, waiting for my father to say that my hair was beautiful and professional, waiting for Marcus to defend his sister. But nobody said a word. My mother just laughed nervously and offered Becky a glass of lemonade. My father turned up the TV. That was the moment I realized that to them, my dignity was less important than making Marcus Golden Girl feel comfortable. They let her insult me in my own house because she was white and she was the prize Marcus had brought home. I sat up in bed and checked the time. 7:15. If my calculations were correct, chaos was currently erupting across town. Last night before I went to sleep, I did not just stop the mortgage payments. I had logged into the Georgia Power account. Since the account was in my name, and I had been paying the bill since 2018, I had the authority to schedule a service disconnection. I had set it for midnight. I imagined the scene vividly. Becky was a creature of comfort. She took 40-minute showers every morning. Right about now, she would be stepping into the shower expecting a stream of steaming hot water. Instead, she would be hit with a blast of freezing cold pipe water because the electric water heater had been dead for 7 hours. I could almost hear her scream. I pictured her wrapping a towel around herself, shivering, her wet hair dripping onto the bathroom floor, screaming for Marcus. She would demand to know why the lights would not turn on, why the hairdryer would not work. My father would be the first to try and fix it. He liked to pretend he was the man of the house, even though he hadn't paid a bill in a decade. He would go to the fuse box, flip the switches, and realize nothing was wrong with the hardware. Then he would pick up the phone to call the power company. I took a sip of water from the glass on my nightstand, savoring the image. The customer service representative would ask for the account number. Dad would not know it. Then they would ask for the social security number associated with the account. He would give his. "I am sorry, sir," the voice on the line would say. "That social does not match our records. This account belongs to a Ms. Keisha Brooks. We cannot discuss the account details with an unauthorized third party." He would argue. He would yell. He would say it is his house. But the law is the law, and the name on the bill is the only one that matters. For the first time in years, my father would have to face the reality that he was a guest in his own life, and I was the landlord. While my parents were likely scrambling in the dark, Marcus would be trying to play the hero. He always did this when Becky was upset. He would try to buy her forgiveness with treats. I knew exactly where he would go. There was a French bakery called Douceur, about 10 minutes from their house. It was overpriced and trendy, the kind of place Becky insisted on, because it looked good on Instagram. Marcus would walk in chest puffed out, trying to look like the successful entrepreneur he claimed to be. He would order Becky's favorite almond croissant, a large vanilla latte with oat milk, and probably a breakfast sandwich for himself. The total would come to about $45. He would reach into his wallet and pull out the supplementary American Express Platinum card I had given him 5 years ago. It was the card he used to buy his clothes, his gas, and his VIP tables at clubs. He loved the sound it made when he dropped it on the counter, the heavy metal clink of someone else's success. He would tap the card on the reader. He would smile at the barista, probably flirting a little while he waited for the approval. But the approval would not come. Transaction declined. He would frown and wipe the chip on his designer jeans, thinking it was a mistake. He would insert the card this time. Transaction declined. Please contact issuer. I could see the line of people behind him growing impatient. I could see the barista smile fading. Marcus would start to sweat. He would try to explain that it was a bank error, that his sister must have messed something up. But the machine did not care about his excuses. The card was a brick. He would have to walk out of that bakery empty-handed, returning to a house with no electricity, no hot water, and a screaming fiancé. And for the first time in his life, he would not be able to call his big sister to fix it. By 10 o'clock, I was seated in the glass-walled conference room on the 45th floor. We were in the final stages of negotiating a $50 million distribution contract with a European pharmaceutical giant. The room smelled of fresh coffee and expensive cologne. My team was on one side of the long oak table and the European delegates were on the other. I was in my element. This was the world I had built for myself, a world of logic, precision, and respect. A world where contracts were honored and value was recognized. I was in the middle of explaining our logistics capabilities when the heavy glass door opened. My executive assistant, Sarah, stepped in. She looked pale. Sarah had been with me for 5 years, and I had seen her handle market crashes and supply chain disasters without blinking. But right now, she looked terrified. I held up a hand to pause the meeting and stepped out into the hallway. "I am so sorry to interrupt, Keisha," Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. "But security just called from the lobby. There is a man downstairs. He is screaming your name. He says he is your brother, and he is threatening to fight the guards if they do not let him up." I closed my eyes for a second, taking a deep breath. Marcus. Of course. I turned back to the meeting room. "Gentlemen, please excuse me for a moment. A minor administrative issue requires my attention." I walked to the elevator bank, my heels clicking rhythmically on the marble floor. I pressed the button for the lobby. As the elevator descended 45 floors, I checked my reflection in the mirrored walls. My face was calm, but my blood was boiling. Marcus had crossed a line. He had brought his circus to my place of business. When the elevator doors slid open, the sound hit me first. "You cannot touch me," Do you know who I am? My sister runs this building. I stepped into the lobby. It was a cavernous space with high ceilings and polished stone floors that amplified every sound. And there, in the center of the room, was Marcus. The irony of his appearance was almost funny. He was wearing a $2,000 Gucci tracksuit. I knew exactly how much it cost because I had paid for it 3 months ago for his birthday. On his feet were Balenciaga sneakers that I had also purchased. He was literally draped in my money while screaming at the top of his lungs about how selfish I was. 2 large security guards were blocking his path to the turnstiles. Marcus was red in the face, veins bulging in his neck. He was waving his phone in their faces, probably trying to show them the declined transaction notification as if it were a badge of honor. Keisha. He spotted me. His face twisted into a mix of relief and fury. He pushed against the chest of the lead guard. See? There she is. Tell these gorillas to back off, Keisha. Fix this. Fix the card right now. Do you know how embarrassed I was at the bakery? I stopped about 10 feet away from him. I crossed my arms and said nothing. Are you deaf? Marcus yelled, stepping forward. The guard grabbed his arm to restrain him, and Marcus snapped. He swung his free arm, a clumsy wild punch that glanced off the guard's shoulder. That was a mistake. Within seconds, the guards had him pinned to the cold marble floor. Marcus was screaming obscenities now, thrashing against the weight of 2 trained professionals. The receptionist had already called the police, and I could see 2 uniformed officers jogging through the revolving doors. I stood perfectly still, watching my brother squirm on the ground in the clothes I bought him. The police officers took over, pulling Marcus up and slapping handcuffs on his wrists. Marcus looked at me, his eyes wide with disbelief. He expected me to intervene. He expected me to pull out my checkbook or use my title to make this go away. That is what I had always done. The older police officer walked over to me. He looked from the frantic man in cuffs to me in my tailored suit. Ma, am I apologize for the disturbance, the officer said. This man claims he is your brother. He says this is a misunderstanding. Do you know him? Time seemed to slow down. I looked at Marcus. I looked at the fear in his eyes. I looked at the brother I had protected since we were kids. The brother I had bailed out of jail twice, the brother who had stood by while his fiancée called me names. I looked the officer in the eye. My voice was steady and loud enough for everyone in the lobby to hear. I have never seen this man before in my life. Marcus' jaw dropped. Keisha? What? Stop playing. Tell them. Tell. I continued speaking to the officer, ignoring the voice screaming my name. I do not know who he is, but he is trespassing and he just assaulted your security guard. I would like you to remove him from the premises immediately, and please ensure he understands that if he returns, he will be arrested for harassment. But Keisha, Marcus screamed as the officers began to drag him toward the exit. You can't do this. I am your brother. Mom is going to kill you. You are crazy. I watched them shove him into the back of the squad car. I watched the flashing blue lights reflect off the glass of the building. Only when the car drove away did I turn back to the elevators. I went back upstairs, apologized to the European delegates for the delay, and closed the $50 million deal before lunch. I was sitting in my office reviewing the contracts when my personal cell phone buzzed. It was a number I did not recognize. I usually ignored unknown numbers, but something told me to answer this one. This is Keisha. Hi, Keisha. The voice was soft, breathless, and sickeningly sweet. It was a voice I had heard making fun of my clothes and my job 1,000 times. But now it sounded like a best friend. It is Becky. Look, I know things have been a little tense lately, but we really need to talk. Are you busy? I looked at the phone vibrating on my mahogany desk. The number was unknown, but I knew exactly who was on the other end. Becky never called me directly. For 3 years she had used Marcus as her messenger, her shield, and her weapon. But Marcus was currently sitting in a holding cell downtown, likely begging for a phone call that I would not answer. That meant the princess finally had to do her own dirty work. I motioned to Sarah, my executive assistant, who was still standing by the door looking shaken from the scene in the lobby. I put a finger to my lips and pressed the speakerphone button. I wanted a witness. I wanted someone else to hear the madness I had been living with, so I would know for sure that I was not the crazy one. Keisha, are you there? The voice was soft, breathless, and sickeningly sweet. It was a performance. It was the same tone she used when she wanted my parents to buy her something expensive, or when she wanted to get out of a family obligation. I am here, Becky, I said, leaning back in my leather chair. Oh, thank God. Look, I know things have been a little tense lately. Marcus is just so passionate, you know. He loves you so much and he just wants us to be a family. But we really need to talk. Are you busy? I am running a corporation, Becky. I am always busy. Make it quick. I heard a heavy sigh on the other end. A sigh designed to make me feel guilty for having a job. Keisha, I am calling because I am worried about you. I know you are acting out right now because you are hurting. I know it is hard for you to see Marcus so happy and moving forward with his life when you are, well, when you are still alone. I looked at Sarah. Her eyes went wide. She clamped a hand over her mouth to stifle a gasp. Becky continued, her voice dripping with fake sympathy. And I know the news about the baby probably triggered you. Mom told me you have been sensitive about your biological clock ticking. It must be so painful to see your younger brother building the family you always wanted. But please, Keisha, do not take your jealousy out on Mom and Dad. They are old. They are fragile. Cutting off their power because you are bitter about my pregnancy is just... it is beneath you. I felt a bubble of laughter rising in my throat. It was absurd. She was rewriting reality in real time. In her version of the story, I was not the victim of financial abuse. I was just a lonely, bitter spinster lashing out at her fairy tale romance. I looked at Sarah again. She was shaking her head in disbelief, silently mouthing the word, "Wow." I leaned forward toward the microphone. Are you finished, Becky? There was a pause. The sweetness in her voice hardened just a fraction. I am asking you to be the bigger person, Keisha. Turn the electricity back on. Give Marcus his cards back. Apologize to us. If you do that, we can forget this little tantrum happened. We will even save you a seat at the wedding. I laughed. I could not help it. It was a dry, cold sound that echoed in the quiet office. Becky listened to me very carefully. There is no jealousy. There is only math. You and Marcus cost me $4,000 a month. I simply decided to stop buying a subscription to a service I do not use. The silence on the other end lasted for 5 seconds. When she spoke again, the baby voice was gone. The mask had slipped completely. You think you are so smart, don't you? You think because you have a degree and a fancy office you are better than us. But you are just mean. We are done here, Becky. I reached for the button to end the call. If you hang up, I will destroy you. I paused, my finger hovering over the screen. Excuse me. I have a following, Keisha. I have 5,000 followers on Instagram. If you do not turn the power back on and pay for my venue, I will tell everyone who you really are. I will post a video today. I will tell them you attacked me. I will tell them you cut off your elderly parents because you hate that Marcus is marrying a white woman. Sarah gasped audibly this time. Becky continued, her voice rising in triumph. That is right. I will tell the world you are a racist. I will tell them you have been bullying me for years because of the color of my skin. How do you think your white corporate partners will like that? How long do you think you will keep this corner office when Twitter finds out you are abusing an expecting white mother? It was a nuclear threat. In today's climate, an accusation like that could ruin a career before the truth even had a chance to put its shoes on. She knew exactly what she was doing. She was weaponizing her identity against mine. I took a slow, deep breath. You could do that, Becky. You could certainly try. But before you post anything, I want you to go outside and check something for me. What? She snapped. Go check the glove box of that white Mercedes C-Class you are driving. The one you drove to my parents' house because your credit was too bad to lease a car of your own. Look at the registration. Why would I do that? Just do it. Or don't. But you might want to know who actually owns the car before you accuse them of a hate crime. I waited. I could hear her breathing on the other line. It is in my name, Becky. I said, my voice dropping to a whisper. I bought that car for Marcus 2 years ago. The title is in my safe. The insurance is on my policy. And I do not let people who threaten me drive my vehicles. What does that mean? Her voice wavered. It means you have a choice. You can post your little lies on Instagram. Or you can start walking. Because I am taking back what is mine. I ended the call before she could respond. My heart was pounding, but my hands were steady. I looked at Sarah. Did you get all that? Sarah nodded, pulling her phone out of her pocket where she had been recording the entire conversation. Every word. Good. Save that. We might need it later. I picked up my office phone and dialed a number I had looked up earlier that morning. It was a local repossession company known for their speed and lack of questions. A gruff voice answered on the second ring. Yeah, this is Mike. Hi, Mike. I have a job for you. It is a priority pickup. 2022 Mercedes C300. White. Do you have the paperwork? I have the title and the spare key in my hand. I am the sole owner. Where is the vehicle? I gave him my parents' address. It is parked in the driveway. The driver has been notified that the vehicle is unauthorized. You want us to grab it now? No. I checked my watch. I wanted to give Becky a few hours to stew in her panic. I wanted her to sit in that dark house wondering if I was bluffing. Pick it up at midnight. And Mike, yeah, do not knock. Just hook it up and drag it away. I want it to be a surprise. By 2 in the afternoon, the silence I had fought so hard to secure was shattered. It did not start with a phone call, but with a screenshot sent by my cousin Tasha, the only member of my extended family who still had some common sense. Check Facebook, she wrote. They are coming for you, Keisha. I opened the app, and there it was. My mother had gone nuclear. She had posted a 2,000-word manifesto titled, A Mother's Heartbreak. It was a masterpiece of fiction. In her version of the story, she and my father were frail elderly victims abandoned by the daughter they had sacrificed everything to raise. She wrote about scrubbing floors to pay for my piano lessons, which never happened. She wrote about going hungry so I could have new school clothes, which was actually paid for by my grandmother. She claimed that I had cut off their electricity in a fit of jealousy over my brother's happiness, leaving them to freeze in the dark without food. She conveniently left out the part about the 3 years of insults, the $4,000 monthly allowance, and the fact that I had offered to pay for therapy, which they refused. The post already had 300 likes and dozens of comments. Shame on her, one comment read. Money changes people, another said. Then came the texts from the flying monkeys. First, it was Auntie Bernice. Keisha, I changed your diapers. How can you let the devil harden your heart like this? Your parents are good people. Turn the lights back on and repent. Then came the message that actually stung. It was from Pastor Williams, the man who had baptized me. Honor thy father and mother, that thy days may be long upon the land. Keisha, daughter, do not let worldly wealth blind you to your spiritual duty. We are praying for your soul. Call your mother. I lowered the phone and stared out the window at the Atlanta skyline. For the first time all day, I felt my resolve crack. The guilt was a physical weight in my stomach. It was the same guilt they had programmed into me since I was a child. The idea that I owed them my life because they had done the bare minimum of raising me. I closed my eyes and a memory surfaced. I was 8 years old before Marcus was born. My father had taken me to the park. He pushed me on the swing higher and higher until I felt like I was flying. He had called me his little rocket scientist. He had been proud of me then. Before the gambling started, before Marcus became the golden boy, before I became just a bank account. Maybe I was being too harsh. Maybe cutting the power was too far. They were in their 60s after all. Maybe I should just pay the overdue bill and set up a stricter budget instead of cutting them off completely. I reached for my phone, my thumb hovering over the banking app ready to transfer enough money to get their lights back on. Ping. A notification dropped down from the top of the screen. It was from Wells Fargo, but it was not a deposit alert. Fraud alert. Attempted withdrawal of $10,000. Joint savings account ending in 0459. I froze. That account. I had opened it when I was 18 years old, right before I left for college. My father was a co-signer because I had no credit history at the time. I had not used that account in 15 years. I thought it was dormant. I thought it was empty. But I had transferred $10,000 there last week to park it for a surprise anniversary gift for myself. I tapped the notification to see the details. The transaction had taken place at a branch teller window 20 minutes ago. The teller had flagged it because the signature on the withdrawal slip did not match mine. I requested an image of the slip. There on the screen was my name written in shaky handwriting that tried to look elegant, but failed. It was my father's handwriting. He had gone to the bank. He knew I had money in that old forgotten account. And instead of calling me to apologize instead of asking for help, he had tried to forge my signature to steal $10,000. The memory of the park and the swing evaporated. The guilt vanished instantly, replaced by a cold, hard rage. They were not hurt. They were not sorry. They were scavengers picking the meat off my bones. I did not transfer the money for the lights. I did not text Pastor Williams back. Instead, I opened my contact list and scrolled past family to the letter J. James Sterling. My attorney. The man who charged $600 an hour and was worth every penny. He answered on the first ring, Keisha. To what do I owe the pleasure, James? I said, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. I need you to clear your schedule for the rest of the week. Is everything okay? No. I watched the sun glinting off the glass buildings of the city. I am done being the daughter. I am ready to be the plaintiff. I want to file a police report for identity theft and forgery against my father. And James. Yes. Start the eviction paperwork. I want them out. All of them. While I was sitting in my lawyer office initiating a fraud investigation, my father was sitting at his kitchen table staring at a crimson envelope that had just arrived in the mail. It was stamped with urgent block letters that read, "Past due mortgage notice." My mother was pacing the kitchen, wringing her hands because the electricity was still off and the food in the refrigerator was starting to spoil. She looked at the envelope with terror in her eyes, but my father just laughed. He picked up the letter and tossed it onto the pile of unopened mail on the counter like it was a piece of junk. He told my mother to stop worrying. He said Keisha is just playing games. She is trying to scare us into submission. But she forgets who the man of this house is. He pointed a shaking finger toward the front door. He said, "Look at the mailbox, woman. What does it say? It says Brooks family. That means this is my house, my land, my castle. As long as my name is on that metal box, she cannot touch us." It was almost tragic how confident he was. He truly believed that a name on a mailbox superseded the laws of property ownership. He had conveniently rewritten history in his mind to suit his ego. Here's the truth that my father had blocked out. 5 years ago, there was no castle. There was only a foreclosure sign on the front lawn. My father had quietly gambled away their retirement savings on sports betting and bad stock tips. The bank was 3 days away from seizing the property and putting them on the street. I remember the phone call vividly. My mother was sobbing so hard she could barely speak, begging me to save them. I did save them. But I was a CFO, not a charity worker. I knew that if I just gave them money, they would lose the house again within a year. So I structured a deal. I paid off the arrears, and I refinanced the remaining mortgage in my name to get a lower interest rate. I allowed their names to remain on the deed for appearances so they would not be embarrassed in front of the neighbors. However, I made them sign a secondary document, a quitclaim deed, into the Keisha Brooks Revocable Trust, along with a binding lease agreement. They were so desperate to sign the papers and keep the house that they did not read a single paragraph. They did not realize that legally they were no longer owners. They were tenants at will living in a property owned 100% by my trust. I held the mortgage note. I held the insurance policy. And most importantly, I held the power of attorney over the property. They were living in my house strictly because I allowed it. But back in that hot kitchen, Becky did not know any of this. She was sitting at the table fanning herself with a magazine, sweating in the Atlanta heat. She picked up the mortgage notice and looked at it not with fear, but with greed. She looked around the dated kitchen at the peeling wallpaper and the old cabinets, and she sneered. "Why are you guys even fighting to keep this place?" she asked. Her voice was dripping with disdain. "This house is old. It is falling apart, and clearly Keisha is using it to control you." My father looked at her, listening. Becky leaned in closer, her eyes gleaming. "Sell it, Dad. Just sell the whole thing." My mother gasped. "We cannot sell our home." "Why not?" Becky argued. "Think about it. This house is probably worth what? $500,000. If you sell it, you get all that cash. You can pay off whatever little bit is left on the mortgage and keep the rest. You can buy a brand new condo. You can pay for my wedding without needing Keisha money. You can buy Marcus a new car. You can be rich." I could almost see the gears turning in my father's head. He did not see a legal contract. He saw a way out. He saw a way to regain his pride and fund the lifestyle he thought he deserved. He thought about the equity. He thought about throwing a stack of cash in my face and telling me he did not need me anymore. "You know what my father said," slamming his hand on the table. "You are right, Becky. Why should we sit here in the dark, begging that ungrateful girl for help? We are sitting on a gold mine." He stood up, feeling tall and powerful for the first time in years. He grabbed his phone. He did not call me. He did not call a lawyer to check the deed. He searched for the number of the top real estate agent in Atlanta, a woman whose face was on billboards all over the city. He dialed the number and put it on speaker so Becky and my mother could hear. When the agent answered, my father puffed out his chest. "Yes, hello. My name is Mr. Brooks. I have a 4-bedroom colonial in a prime neighborhood. I want to list it for sale immediately. Cash buyers only. I am ready to cash out." He had a smug smile on his face as he set up the appointment for the next morning. He honestly thought he was about to become a millionaire. He had no idea he was inviting a professional witness to the scene of a crime he did not even know he was committing. He was trying to sell a house he did not own. The silver Lexus SUV pulled into the driveway at exactly 10 in the morning. My father had spent the last hour sweeping the front porch and yelling at my mother to hide the family photos that looked too cluttered. They were putting on a performance. They wanted to look like a distinguished elderly couple ready to downsize and retire to Florida, not a pair of desperate squatters trying to fence stolen property. Linda Vance was the kind of real estate agent who wore Chanel suits and sold houses before they even hit the market. She walked into the foyer, and her heels clicked authoritatively on the hardwood floors I had paid to refinish last year. She looked around, taking notes on her iPad with a practiced smile. My father was beaming. He walked her through the living room, pointing out the fireplace and the custom built-in bookshelves. He took credit for every renovation I had funded. He told her how he had personally selected the granite for the kitchen island. He told her how he had maintained the landscaping. Becky and Marcus followed behind them like hungry wolves waiting for a kill. Becky was wearing oversized sunglasses indoors, holding a calculator app open on her phone. Finally, they all sat down around the dining room table. Linda set her iPad down and folded her hands. "Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, you have a lovely home," she said. "The market in this zip code is aggressive right now. Inventory is low and demand is high. Based on the square footage and the upgrades, I believe we can list this property for $1.2 million. The silence that followed was electric. $1.2 million. I can only imagine the look on my father's face. That number was not just money to him. It was validation. It was proof that he was a smart man, a successful man. It was enough money to pay off his gambling debts, buy a condo, and still have plenty left over to pretend he was rich. Becky actually squealed. She grabbed Marcus' arm and whispered loud enough for everyone to hear. "Baby, that is it. That is the venue money. That is the honeymoon in Bali. We can buy that Range Rover next week." My mother started crying soft, happy tears. Oh, thank you, Jesus, she whispered. Thank you for providing for us. Linda smiled professionally. If you are ready to proceed, we can sign the listing agreement right now. I just need to verify a few details from the public records for the contract. She tapped on her iPad screen, logging into the county property appraiser's database. It was a standard procedure. A formality. My father pulled a pen from his pocket, ready to sign his name with a flourish. Linda frowned. She tapped the screen again. She zoomed in. The smile on her face faltered. "Excuse me, Mr. Brooks," she said, her voice losing some of its warmth. "Are you sure you are the sole owner of this property?" My father laughed nervously. "Of course I am. I bought this house 30 years ago. My name is on the mail." Linda turned the iPad around so they could see the screen. "I am afraid the records show a transfer of title dated 5 years ago," she said. "The current owner of record is not you. It is a corporate entity listed as Keisha Holdings, LLC. The room went deadly quiet. My father stared at the screen. He squinted at the legal text. He saw the date. He saw the transfer amount. And then he remembered the papers he had signed in the kitchen when the foreclosure loom was hanging over his head. He had not read them then, but the law did not care about his illiteracy. Becky stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "What does that mean?" she shrieked. "What is Keisha Holdings?" "It means," Linda said, standing up and collecting her purse, "that Mr. Brooks does not have the legal authority to sell this home. He is not the owner. He is a tenant." "No," my father stammered. "That is a mistake. That is my daughter. She just handles the paperwork for me. I can tell her to sign. It is my house." Linda shook her head. Her professional demeanor was gone, replaced by the annoyance of a busy woman whose time had been wasted. "Sir, unless you have a power of attorney or a deed with your name on it, I cannot help you. Listing a property you do not own is fraud. I am going to have to ask you not to contact my office again unless the actual owner wishes to speak with me." She walked out the front door without looking back. The sound of her Lexus engine fading away was the sound of their million-dollar dream dying a violent death. Becky turned on my father. "You said it was yours," she screamed. "You said we were rich. You lied to me." "I did not know," my father whispered. "I thought she was just helping." "She is a thief," Becky yelled, kicking the leg of the table. "That bitch stole our house. She tricked you. She has been planning this for years. She wants to ruin us. She wants me to have nothing." My mother sat with her head in her hands, weeping. This time, they were not happy tears. Marcus slammed his fist into the wall. "How are we going to pay for the wedding now? The deposit is due in 2 days. Becky looked at the dent Marcus had made in the drywall. She stopped screaming. Her breathing slowed down. She looked from the damaged wall to the expensive chandelier above the table. A dark, twisted look came over her face. "If she wants to be the owner, let her be the owner," Becky said, her voice low and dangerous. "What do you mean?" Marcus asked. Becky walked over to the wall and ran her finger over the dent. "If we cannot sell it, neither can she. If she wants to kick us out, let's give her something to fix. Let's see how much this house is worth when we are done with it." She went to the kitchen drawer and pulled out a hammer. She looked at my father, who was still in shock. "Call her," Becky said. "Tell her the house is falling apart. Tell her she better come over here right now, or there won't be a house left to evict us from." The humidity in my parents' house was suffocating. With the air conditioning still cut off, and the Atlanta summer heat bearing down, the temperature inside had climbed to 90 degrees. But the heat in the room was nothing compared to the fire burning in Becky's eyes. She was sitting on the edge of the sofa, scrolling through her Instagram feed with a manic intensity. She had spent the last 6 months curating a digital fairy tale. She had posted photos of venue mood boards she could not afford. She had tagged high-end designers she had never met. She had promised her 5,000 followers the wedding of the century. Canceling was not an option. In Becky world, public humiliation was a fate worse than debt. She looked up at Marcus, who was sweating through his t-shirt, pacing back and forth on the hardwood floor. "We need $50,000 by Friday," Becky said, her voice flat and dangerous. "Or I am leaving you." Marcus stopped pacing. He looked terrified. His face was pale and his hands were shaking. He knew exactly what she was asking him to do. When the bank accounts ran dry and the credit cards were declined, there was only one place left to go in our old neighborhood. There were men who lent money without credit checks. Men who did not ask for pay stubs, but asked for collateral in blood and bone. Becky, I cannot go to Big T, Marcus whispered. You know what he does to people who don't pay. The interest rate is 40% a week. If I miss a payment, he won't just sue me. He will break my legs. Becky stood up and walked over to him. She took his hand and placed it on her stomach. Her stomach was perfectly flat, but she rubbed it gently as if protecting a fragile life. Are you saying you do not care about our son? She asked softly. Marcus flinched. No, of course I care. But Becky, it is dangerous. Stress is bad for the baby, Marcus. Do you want me to lose him? Do you want your son to be born into poverty because his father was too scared to be a man? We just need the money for the wedding. Once we are married, we will get the gifts. We will get the cash envelopes from the guests. We can pay the loan shark back immediately. It is just a bridge loan. It was a lie, a calculated, vicious lie. There was no baby, and the guests they had invited were mostly my parents' church friends and Becky influencer wannabes, none of whom had deep pockets. But Marcus was desperate to believe her. He looked at her stomach, and his resistance crumbled. He nodded slowly, wiping the sweat from his forehead. He walked out the door to make a deal with the devil. With the immediate cash flow secured for the vendors, Becky turned her attention to the bigger prize. The loan shark money would cover the deposit, but it would not cover the extravagant lifestyle she demanded. She needed a sustainable income source. She needed me. They sat around the kitchen table fanning themselves with junk mail and hatched a plan. They decided that my silence wasn't a sign of strength, but a sign that I was wavering. They convinced themselves that deep down, I was just a lonely older sister desperate to be included. They believed that if they put me on the spot in front of an audience, I would crumble. We will invite her to the rehearsal dinner, my mother suggested, wiping her forehead with a damp cloth. It will be at the country club. All the aunts and uncles will be there. The pastor will be there. If we present her with the bill in front of everyone, she won't be able to say no. She has too much pride to look cheap in public. It was a classic shakedown dressed up as a family gathering. 2 days later, I was sitting in my climate-controlled office, reviewing quarterly projections when the receptionist buzzed me. Ms. Brooks, there is a courier here with a package for you. It requires a signature. I signed for a thick cream-colored envelope. It was heavy, made of expensive cardstock with gold foil lining. The calligraphy on the front was hand-lettered. It smelled faintly of lavender perfume. It was the kind of invitation that cost $20 just to print. I opened it. Inside was a formal invitation to the rehearsal dinner of Marcus Brooks and Becky Miller. The location was the exclusive Piedmont Driving Club. The date was tomorrow night, but behind the invitation there was a second piece of paper. It was not cardstock. It was a printed invoice. At the top it said, Family Contribution, Breakdown. I scanned the list. Venue rental, $10,000. Catering for 150 guests, $8,000. Floral arrangements, $5,000. Bridal party gifts, $2,000. Total due, immediately, $25,000. At the bottom in Becky handwriting, there was a note. Keisha, we are willing to forgive your recent behavior and let you be part of our special day. We know you want to do the right thing. Bring the check to the dinner. Do not embarrass us. I stared at the paper. They were not asking. They were billing me for the privilege of being abused. They truly believed that shaming me would open my wallet. I leaned back in my chair and let out a short, sharp laugh. They wanted me at the dinner. They wanted a show. I picked up my pen and tapped it against the invoice. Okay, family. You want me to come to dinner? I will come. But I won't be bringing a check. I will be bringing the truth, and it is going to cost you a lot more than $25,000. I left the invoice sitting on my desk for 3 days. To my family, my silence probably looked like hesitation. They probably thought I was scrambling to move funds around, or that I was crying in my bedroom, wondering how to win back their love. They texted me every few hours. Just checking you got the invite. We need the check by Thursday. Do not be late, Keisha. I did not reply to a single message. I did not read them. I simply archived them into a folder I had named Evidence. While they were waiting for a bank transfer, I was waiting for a manila envelope. On Wednesday afternoon it arrived. It was delivered by Mr. Henderson, a private investigator I usually retained for high-level corporate background checks. He was expensive, discreet, and thorough. He sat across from me in my office and slid the folder across the polished glass desk. "You are not going to like this, Keisha," he said, his voice low and professional. "It is worse than you thought." I opened the file. The first page was a medical background check. Mr. Henderson had managed to legally obtain records through a loophole in Becky insurance history, since she was technically still on a policy that I paid for. Becky had claimed she was 8 weeks pregnant. She had sent a photo of a positive pregnancy test to the family group chat, complete with crying emojis. My mother had already started knitting a blanket. But the document in front of me told a different story. It was a surgical record from Northside Hospital dated 3 years ago. Laparoscopic tubal ligation. I stared at the words. A tubal ligation. Becky had her tubes tied before she even met Marcus. It was medically impossible for her to be pregnant. The baby was a lie. The morning sickness was a performance. She was using a phantom child to extort money from my brother and sympathy from my parents. I turned the page. Mr. Henderson had also followed her for 48 hours. I expected to see photos of her shopping or getting her nails done. Instead, I saw photos of her car, the white Mercedes she had stolen from my parents' driveway, parked at a cheap motel on the outskirts of Decatur. In the grainy but clear images, Becky was standing on the balcony of a second-floor room. She was not alone. A man was with her. He was tall, white, with shaggy blonde hair. I recognized him immediately from old Facebook photos she had forgotten to delete. It was Kyle, her ex-boyfriend from college, the one she claimed was toxic and broke. In the photos they were laughing. In one he had his hand on her waist. In another she was handing him cash. My cash. So she was not just lying about the baby. She was cheating on my brother and funding her affair with the money she was squeezing out of my family. I felt a cold fury rising in my chest, but I pushed it down. I needed to see the rest. "What about my parents?" I asked. Mr. Henderson sighed. He flipped to the back of the dossier. This part was video surveillance stored on a flash drive. He plugged it into my laptop. The video showed the driveway of the house I owned. It was taken yesterday. My father and Marcus were struggling to carry something heavy out the front door. It was wrapped in a blanket, but I recognized the shape immediately. It was the antique mahogany grandfather clock I had bought for my parents' 30th anniversary. I had paid $3,000 for it at an estate sale. They loaded it into the back of a beat-up pickup truck. "Where did they take it?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "A pawn shop on Memorial Drive," Mr. Henderson said. "They got $400 for it. They also sold 2 oil paintings and a box of silver flatware." I watched the video again. I watched my father, the man who used to carry me on his shoulders, selling my love for pennies, just to hand the cash to a son who would waste it on a lying, cheating woman. They were stripping the house. They were selling the furniture I bought, the art I selected, the very forks they ate with. They were cannibalizing their own home to feed the parasite that was destroying them. I closed the laptop. "Thank you, Mr. Henderson," I said. "I will need digital copies of everything sent to my phone, especially the medical records and the motel photos." I sat alone in my office for a long time as the sun went down. The city lights of Atlanta flickered on below me. I looked at the invoice again. $25,000 for a wedding that was built on a lie, a celebration for a baby that did not exist. My phone buzzed again. It was Becky. "TikTok, Keisha. The dinner is tomorrow. Do not make us look bad. We saved you a seat at the head table. Bring the check. I picked up the heavy cream-colored invitation. I ran my thumb over the gold foil. I picked up my phone. I typed a simple message to Becky. I will be there. And I will bring exactly what you deserve. I hit send. Then I picked up the phone to call my lawyer. It was time to accept the invitation. The night before the rehearsal dinner, I was staying at the St. Regis Hotel downtown. I had anticipated that my silence might provoke a desperate reaction, so I decided not to sleep at my apartment. It was a precaution that proved to be a stroke of genius. At 11:30 at night, while I was sipping chamomile tea and reviewing the final details with my lawyer, my phone vibrated on the nightstand. It was a notification from my Nest security system. Motion detected in the foyer. I picked up the phone expecting to see a delivery person or perhaps the building concierge sliding a notice under the door. Instead, I saw the two people I despised most in the world. Marcus and Becky were standing in my entryway. Marcus was holding a silver key. I recognized it immediately. It was the emergency spare key I kept in a magnetic box inside my kitchen drawer. My mother must have swiped it during Thanksgiving last year, the last time she was allowed in my home. She had been saving it for a rainy day, and apparently a hurricane had just made landfall. I did not call the police, not yet. I tapped the record button and zoomed in. I wanted to see exactly what they would do when they thought nobody was watching. They walked into the living room like they were touring a museum. My penthouse was a stark contrast to the clutter and decay of my parents' house. It was open concept with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, Italian leather furniture, and original artwork on the walls. Becky spun around, her eyes wide with a mixture of awe and pure venomous jealousy. "I cannot believe she lives like this," Becky hissed. "Look at this place, Marcus. It is huge. She has all this space just for herself, while we are squeezing into that dump with your parents. It is disgusting." She walked over to my bar cart and picked up a bottle of Crystal Head vodka. She uncapped it and took a swig straight from the bottle, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. "Find the money, Marcus. She probably keeps cash around here. Rich people always have cash stashes." Marcus looked nervous. He was checking the hallway, clearly afraid I might walk out of the bedroom, but Becky pushed him toward my home office. "Go," she ordered. "I am going to check the closet." I switched camera views to the master bedroom. I watched as Becky walked into my walk-in closet. This was my sanctuary. It was where I kept my collection of designer shoes and handbags, investments I had made over a decade of hard work. Becky turned on the lights and gasped. She ran her hands over my silk blouses. She pulled a pair of red-bottom Louboutins off the shelf and tried to shove her feet into them. They were too small, but she forced her heel in anyway, scuffing the leather. She stood in front of my full-length mirror, posing and pouting her lips. She looked at herself with a hunger that made my skin crawl. She did not just want my things. She wanted to be me. She wanted the life I had built without doing any of the work. Meanwhile, on the office camera, Marcus was kneeling in front of the wall safe hidden behind a painting. He was punching random numbers into the keypad. Birthday dates, Mom and Dad's anniversary, my graduation year. The safe remained locked. "It is not opening, Becky," he shouted down the hall. Becky walked out of the closet carrying an orange box. My heart skipped a beat. It was my Birkin bag. A $30,000 handbag I had purchased in Paris. It was the most valuable item in the apartment. "Forget the safe," she said, walking into the office. "We do not need cash tonight, we have leverage." She tossed the orange box onto my desk. "We are going to take this," she said. "And tomorrow at the dinner, when she tries to act high and mighty, we will tell her we have it. If she wants it back, she pays the invoices." Marcus looked at the bag and then at Becky. "I do not know, babe. Taking her stuff is risky. What if she calls the cops?" Becky laughed. A cold, cruel sound that the high-definition microphone picked up perfectly. "She won't call the cops, Marcus. She is your sister. She is weak. She just wants to be loved. That is the thing about you people. What do you mean, you people? Marcus asked. Becky smirked. You know, your family. You are all so emotional, so desperate for validation. You are like a bunch of stupid monkeys that are so easy to trick. I just have to cry a little bit and your mom and dad give me whatever I want. And Keisha is the same. She acts tough, but she is just a lonely little girl. I sat up straight in my hotel bed. Stupid monkeys. She had said it. She had said the quiet part out loud. And she had said it to my brother, who just stood there and took it. Marcus did not get angry. He did not defend his family. He just shrugged and reached for the bag. Yeah, you are probably right, he said. She is soft. I felt a tear run down my cheek, but it was not from sadness. It was from the sheer relief of knowing that I was right to cut them off. There was no redeeming them. Marcus was not a victim, he was a willing participant in his own degradation. Becky grabbed the Birkin bag and slung it over her shoulder. It looked ridiculous against her cheap polyester dress, but she strutted out of the office like she owned the world. Come on, she said. Let us get out of here. I want to wear this to the dinner tomorrow. It will match my shoes perfectly. I watched them leave my apartment, locking the door behind them, as if they had just visited a friend. I watched the timestamp on the video file, 11:45 p.m. I saved the video to my cloud drive. Then I saved it to my phone. Then I emailed a copy to my lawyer. I picked up the phone to call the police, but stopped my finger hovering over the dial pad. Number. If I called them now, the police would pick them up tonight. They would spend a night in jail, get bailed out, and come to the dinner tomorrow with a sob story about how I framed them. I wanted the arrest to be public. I wanted it to be undeniable. I wanted them to walk into that country club feeling invincible, wearing my stolen property, so that when the handcuffs clicked, everyone would know exactly who they were. I lay back on the pillows and closed my eyes. Sleep came easily that night. I knew exactly where my Birkin bag was. It was on the arm of a woman who was walking straight into a prison cell. The Piedmont Driving Club was breathtakingly beautiful in the way that old money establishments always are. The driveway was lined with century-old oaks, and the main building stood like a white marble fortress against the darkening sky. I pulled my Porsche up to the valet stand and stepped out. I had chosen my outfit with surgical precision. I was not wearing the muted colors of a repentant sister. I was wearing a blood-red Alexander McQueen suit that retailed for more than the entire catering budget of this party. My hair was pulled back in a sleek bun, and my makeup was flawless. I looked like the CEO. I was not the doormat they wanted me to be. As I walked through the double doors, the hum of conversation died down instantly. The main ballroom was filled with about 100 people. There were my parents sitting at the head table looking like royalty in their rented formal wear. There was Auntie Bernice whispering behind her hand to Pastor Williams. There were Marcus friends loud and already drunk near the open bar. And there were Becky friends, a gaggle of influencers taking selfies by the flower wall. Every pair of eyes turned to me. I could feel the judgment radiating off them like heat waves. To them, I was the villain. I was the selfish daughter who had abandoned her elderly parents. I was the jealous sister who tried to ruin a wedding. I kept my chin high and walked straight into the center of the room. The silence was heavy and suffocating, but I did not falter. Then I saw her. Becky broke away from her group and practically ran toward me. She was wearing a white cocktail dress that was a little too tight, and on her arm, hanging conspicuously, was my orange Hermes Birkin bag. She had actually done it. She had worn stolen property to a room full of witnesses. It took every ounce of my self-control not to rip it off her shoulder right there. Keisha, you made it, Becky squealed, throwing her arms around me in a fake hug. I stiffened, but I did not push her away. Not yet. She pulled back and looked me up and down, her eyes scanning my hands for a checkbook or an envelope. Her smile was tight, and her voice dropped to a whisper so only I could hear. I knew you would come to your senses. Did you bring the check? The venue manager is asking for the final payment tonight. I looked at her. I looked at the stolen bag. I looked at Marcus, who was standing a few feet away, watching us with a nervous but arrogant grin. I smiled. It was the sharpest, coldest smile I had ever worn. "I did not bring a check, Becky," I said, my voice smooth and loud enough for the nearby tables to hear. "I brought a gift. In fact, I brought the biggest gift of your entire life." Becky's eyes lit up. She assumed I meant I had paid off the entire wedding plus extra. She assumed I had bought them a house. She grabbed my arm and turned to the room. "Everyone look, Keisha is here, and she has a big surprise for us." A ripple of relief went through the room. My mother let out a loud, dramatic sigh and clasped her hands together in prayer. My father puffed out his chest, looking vindicated. The aunts and uncles nodded at each other, murmuring that finally, the prodigal daughter had returned to her senses. They all thought they had won. They thought their pressure campaign had worked. They thought I was back in my box, ready to serve. Marcus walked over and clapped a hand on my shoulder. His grip was heavy and possessive. "I knew you loved us, sis," he said, his breath smelling of expensive scotch. "Thanks for stepping up. We really appreciate it." I looked at his hand on my expensive suit jacket. I gently removed it. "You are welcome, Marcus," I said. "Why don't you go sit down? You are going to want to be seated for this." I walked toward the small stage at the front of the room where a microphone stand was set up for toasts. The sound of my heels on the parquet floor was the only sound in the room. Everyone was watching me with expectant, greedy smiles. They were waiting for the apology. They were waiting for the money. I stepped up onto the platform and took the microphone from the stand. It felt heavy and cool in my hand. I looked out at the sea of faces. I saw my parents beaming with pride, not for me, but for the money they thought I was about to give them. I saw Becky stroking the leather of my bag, looking at me with triumph. I saw Marcus raising his glass to me, a look of pure, unearned victory on his face. I took a deep breath. The air in the room felt electric. "Good evening, everyone," I said, my voice amplified by the speakers filling every corner of the ballroom. "Thank you for welcoming me here tonight. My sister-in-law asked me to bring a contribution to this wedding. She asked me to prove how much I care about this family. So I have prepared a presentation that I think will clear up everything." I signaled to the audio-visual technician in the back of the room, a young man I had tipped $200 earlier that evening, to connect my laptop to the main projector screen. Marcus grinned wider. He probably thought I had made a slideshow of childhood memories. He raised his glass higher, mouthing the words, "Thank you," to me. I looked him dead in the eye and pressed the enter key on my laptop. The screen behind me flickered to life. The screen behind me flickered to life, casting a harsh blue glow over the dimly lit ballroom. The image was grainy but unmistakable. It was the high-definition feed from my living room security camera, time-stamped 11:45 the previous night. The room went quiet, but it was a confused silence. They were expecting a slideshow of childhood photos, or perhaps a romantic montage of the couple. Instead, they were looking at the interior of my penthouse apartment. On the screen, the digital versions of Marcus and Becky walked into the frame. The audio was crystal clear. Every person in the room heard the sound of Becky's voice echoing through the speakers. She was holding my bottle of vodka, swigging from it like a sailor. Then she started speaking. I watched the faces in the audience. My parents were squinting, trying to understand what they were seeing. Auntie Bernice adjusted her glasses. Marcus, who was still standing near the front, turned pale. He recognized the clothes he was wearing. He recognized the crime. Then came the words that would burn this family to the ground. On the screen, Becky laughed. It was a cruel, mocking sound. She looked at Marcus and said the words I had heard the night before. She called us monkeys. She called my parents stupid and desperate. She said that we were easy to trick because we were so desperate for white validation. The air was sucked out of the room. This was a room full of proud African-American people. My family. My parents' friends. The pastor. They had welcomed Becky with open arms. They had cooked for her, defended her, and treated her like a princess. And now they were watching her stand in my living room holding my stolen property and calling them racial slurs with a smile on her face. Becky let out a strangled cry from the floor. "No," she screamed, lunging toward the stage. "Turn it off! Stop it! It is fake! It is AI!" She tried to scramble up the steps, but two of my cousins, large men who had played football in college, stepped in front of her. They did not touch her. They just stood there like a wall, their arms crossed their faces hard as stone. They had heard the words she used, and they were not moving. I did not stop the video. I let it play until the end where she grabbed my Birkin bag and called my brother weak. Then I paused it on a freeze frame of her face twisted in a sneer. I looked down at my parents. My mother had her hand over her mouth. Tears were streaming down her face, but they were not the tears of a victim playing for sympathy. They were tears of pure humiliation. She looked at Becky, the girl she had defended against her own daughter, and she saw a stranger. My father looked like he had been punched in the stomach. He was staring at the floor, unable to meet anyone's eyes. But I was not done. I leaned into the microphone. My voice was calm, deadly calm. "As you can see, my sister-in-law has some very strong opinions about this family. She thinks you are stupid. She thinks you are easy targets. And honestly, based on how much money she has squeezed out of you in the last year, maybe she is right." I clicked a button on my remote. The video disappeared. It was replaced by a scanned document. It was a medical record from Northside Hospital. "But the racism is not the only thing she is hiding." I continued. "We are all here tonight to celebrate a wedding, but also to celebrate a new life, right? A baby. The future of the Brooks legacy." I pointed to the screen. "This is a medical record from 3 years ago. It belongs to Rebecca Miller." For those of you who do not have a medical degree, let me explain what a bilateral salpingectomy is. It is a surgical procedure where the fallopian tubes are removed entirely. It is a permanent form of sterilization. I let the words hang in the air. "Becky is not pregnant," I said. "She has not been pregnant. She can never be pregnant. The ultrasound she showed you was downloaded from Google. The morning sickness was a performance, and the money you gave her for the nursery. Well, I think we saw in the video where that money went. It went to vodka and probably to the ex-boyfriend she was meeting at the motel last week." I clicked to the next slide. It was the photo of Becky on the motel balcony kissing Kyle. The room erupted. It was not just murmurs anymore. It was a roar. Chairs scraped against the floor as people stood up. My aunts were shouting. The pastor looked like he was about to faint. But I only had eyes for one person. Marcus was standing frozen near the table. He looked like a man who had just watched his entire world disintegrate. He looked at the medical document. Then he looked at the photo of the ex-boyfriend. Then he slowly turned his head toward Becky. Becky was shaking her head frantically, tears ruining her makeup. "Marcus, baby, please listen," she sobbed, reaching out for him. "She is lying. She forged it. You know I love you." Marcus took a step back. His voice was shaking so hard I could barely hear him over the commotion. "You said you were pregnant," he whispered. Becky tried to grab his arm. "Baby, please. You said it was a boy," Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. "We picked out names. I sold my stuff for you. I borrowed money from dangerous people for you." He looked at her stomach, the flat stomach she had been rubbing for weeks. The realization hit him like a physical blow. There was no baby. There was no future. There was just a mountain of debt and a woman who thought he was a monkey. Marcus looked up at me on the stage. For the first time in years I saw my brother. Not the leech, not the golden child, but the broken little boy who had just realized that the only person who had ever actually told him the truth was the sister he had betrayed. The chaos in the ballroom was deafening. Becky was still screaming that the photos were fake, claiming that I had hired people to Photoshop her face onto someone else's body. She was desperate, flailing like a drowning woman trying to pull everyone else down with her. She grabbed my mother's hand, begging her to believe that the medical records were forged. My mother looked at her with hollow eyes, unable to move, unable to speak. The illusion of the perfect family had been shattered, and the shards were cutting deep. I stood on the stage and watched them. I did not feel the need to shout over them. I had one more move to make. One final strike that would end this war permanently. I reached into my leather portfolio and pulled out a thick yellow manila envelope. The sight of it made the room go quiet again. There is something universally terrifying about a yellow legal envelope. It never brings good news. It signifies lawsuits, audits, and endings. I walked to the edge of the stage and tossed the envelope onto the table in front of my parents. It landed with a heavy thud, knocking over a half-empty glass of wine. The burgundy liquid spilled onto the white tablecloth, spreading like a stain of blood, but nobody moved to clean it up. "What is this?" my father whispered, his voice trembling. I leaned into the microphone. "That is reality, Dad. Inside that envelope are two very important documents. The first one is for you and Mom." I paused, letting the tension build. "You spent this morning trying to sell my house. You invited a real estate agent into a property you do not own to profit from an asset you did not pay for. That is a violation of the lease agreement you signed 5 years ago. It is also a breach of the trust." My mother looked up. "Lease agreement? What are you talking about?" "It is our home." I shook my head slowly. "No, Mom. It was never your home, not since the bank tried to take it. I bought it. I own it. And because you allowed unauthorized occupants, namely Marcus and Becky, to live there and damage the property, and because you attempted to sell it fraudulently, I am exercising my right as the landlord." I pointed a finger at the envelope. "That is a formal notice to vacate. An eviction notice. You have 24 hours to remove your personal belongings from the premises. If you are not out by tomorrow evening, the sheriff will remove you forcefully." The room gasped. My aunts and uncles looked at each other in shock. Evicting one's own parents was unheard of in our circle. But they had seen the video. They knew what my parents had done. They knew about the stolen furniture and the betrayal. The judgment in their eyes shifted from me to the two old people sitting at the head table. My father slumped in his chair. "Where will we go, Keisha? We have nowhere." I did not answer him. I turned my attention to Becky. She was standing next to Marcus, wiping her running mascara, holding my orange Birkin bag against her chest like a shield. She looked defiant, thinking that at least she still had the bag. She thought the worst thing I could do was kick her out of a house she hated anyway. She was wrong. "The second document is for you, Becky," I said, my voice hardening. Becky sneered. "I do not care about your papers, Keisha. You can keep your ugly house. Marcus and I are leaving." "Come on, Marcus." She grabbed Marcus' arm, trying to pull him toward the exit. But Marcus did not move. He was staring at me. "You might want to stay, Becky," I said, "because leaving right now would be a felony." Becky stopped. "What are you talking about?" I pointed to the orange bag on her arm. Then I pointed to the gold locket hanging around her neck. "You made a mistake tonight. A very big mistake. You thought that because we were family, you could walk into my home and take whatever you wanted without consequences. You thought I would be too embarrassed to call the police on my brother's fiancé." I picked up a piece of paper from the podium. "This is a police report I filed this morning. It lists several items stolen from my penthouse apartment. An Hermes Birkin bag valued at $30,000, and a vintage gold locket with a diamond inlay." I looked at the necklace resting on her collarbone. "That locket belonged to our grandmother. She left it to me in her will. It is not just jewelry, Becky. It is an heirloom, and you are wearing it." Becky's hand flew to her throat, covering the gold pendant. She looked around the room, realizing that every single person was staring at the stolen goods. She had walked into a trap. By wearing the items to the party, she had provided undeniable proof of possession. In the state of Georgia, theft of property exceeding $500 is a felony. I explained, my voice cold and clinical, like I was reading a financial report. "The items you are currently wearing are valued at over $40,000. That is grand larceny. It carries a sentence of up to 10 years in prison. Becky's face went white. She tried to unclasp the necklace, her fingers fumbling frantically with the delicate chain. She tried to slide the bag off her shoulder, looking for a place to hide it. "Take it," she screamed, throwing the bag onto the floor. "Take it back." "I did not steal it. I borrowed it. Marcus told me I could borrow it." "Right, Marcus. Tell her." She turned to Marcus, desperate for him to cover for her one last time. Marcus looked at the bag on the floor. Then he looked at the medical records still projected on the screen behind me. He looked at the woman who had lied about his child, who had cheated on him, who had called his family monkeys. He looked at me, and for the first time in his life he chose the truth. "I did not tell her to take it," Marcus said, his voice quiet but firm. "She broke into the safe. She took it." Becky screamed, a high-pitched sound of pure rage. "You traitor! You are supposed to support me." I smiled. "It is too late for that, Becky. I did not just file a report. I told the detectives exactly where you would be tonight. I told them you would be here wearing the evidence." As if on cue, the sound began. At first it was faint, a distant wail from the main road, but it grew louder, rapidly closer. The unmistakable rising and falling siren of police cruisers. Red and blue lights began to flash against the tall windows of the ballroom, cutting through the dim interior light. The guests turned toward the entrance. My mother let out a sob, burying her face in her hands. My father stared at the eviction notice, his hands shaking uncontrollably. I stood on the stage, watching the flashing lights illuminate Becky's terrified face. She was trapped. There was no way out. No lie could save her now. No fake pregnancy could garner sympathy. No gaslighting could rewrite the law. I stepped back from the microphone. My work here was done. The truth had been served, and now justice was pulling up to the front door. The double doors of the Piedmont Driving Club swung open with a force that rattled the crystal glasses on the tables. 4 uniformed police officers marched into the ballroom, followed closely by 2 detectives in plain clothes. The festive atmosphere evaporated instantly, replaced by the cold, sterile reality of the law. The DJ cut the music, leaving only the sound of heavy boots hitting the hardwood floor and the terrified gasps of the guests. Becky's panic escalated into frenzy. She realized that the gold locket around her neck was no longer a piece of jewelry, but a shackle that would drag her down. Her fingers clawed frantically at her throat, trying to undo the delicate clasp. She ripped at the chain, snapping the gold links. The vintage heirloom fell from her neck, and she tried to kick it under the table with her heel, hoping to distance herself from the stolen property. But she was not fast enough. One of the detectives, a tall woman with eyes that missed nothing, was already standing in front of her. "Do not move." The detective ordered, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "Step away from the jewelry, ma'am." Becky froze, her hands mid-air. The detective reached down and picked up the gold locket with a gloved hand, holding it up for everyone to see. Then she pointed to the orange Birkin bag lying on the floor where Becky had discarded it moments earlier. "Rebecca Miller, you are under arrest for grand larceny and possession of stolen property," the detective announced, pulling a pair of metal handcuffs from her belt. Becky began to scream as the cold steel clicked around her wrists. It was a shrill, piercing sound of a woman who had never been told no in her life. She looked around the room, begging for help with her eyes, but the guests were backing away, recoiling from her as if she were contagious. Marcus, watching his fiancée get cuffed, decided to make his move. He saw the officers focused on Becky and thought he saw a window of opportunity. He began to edge toward the side exit near the kitchen, trying to blend into the shadows. He probably thought he could slip out the back door, call an Uber, and disappear until things cooled down. He took 3 steps before a heavy hand landed on his shoulder. "Going somewhere?" Marcus asked, a deep voice. Marcus spun around to face a burly officer holding a tablet. "I did not do anything," Marcus stammered, his eyes darting around the room. "I did not take the bag." That was all her. "I am just leaving." The officer shook his head. "Actually, Mr. Brooks, we are not here just for the bag. We have an outstanding warrant for your arrest issued this afternoon." Marcus' face went ashen. Warrant. For what? For check fraud and theft of services, the officer read from the screen. Apparently, you have written several bad checks to cover gambling debts in the last 3 months. The creditors were holding off because someone kept paying the minimum balance on your accounts. But when those payments stopped yesterday, they went straight to the district attorney. I watched from the stage as the realization hit him. For years, I had been quietly paying off his mistakes, covering his bounced checks so he would not get in trouble. By cutting him off financially, I had removed the only thing standing between him and a jail cell. The officer spun Marcus around and slammed him against the wall to cuff him. The golden child, the prince of the family, was now just another suspect with his face pressed against the wallpaper. My parents finally snapped out of their shock. Seeing both their son and his fiancée in handcuffs was too much for them to bear. My mother let out a wail that sounded like a wounded animal. She scrambled up from the table, knocking over her chair, and ran toward me. She grabbed the hem of my expensive red jacket, her tears staining the fabric. "Keisha, please," she begged, her voice cracking. "Stop this. Tell them to stop. You cannot let them take your brother. He is family. He is your blood. Just tell the officers it was a misunderstanding. Tell them you gave them permission. Please, baby, I am begging you." My father was right behind her, his face pale and shaking. "Keisha, fix this. You have money. You have lawyers. Make this go away. We are a family. We do not do this to each other." I looked down at them. I looked at my mother grabbing my clothes, the same woman who had told me to eat alone on my birthday. I looked at my father demanding I use my money to save them, the same man who tried to sell my house behind my back. I gently but firmly peeled my mother's fingers off my jacket. I stepped back, creating a physical distance between us that matched the emotional distance they had created years ago. I looked my mother in the eyes. I did not feel anger anymore. I did not feel sadness. I just felt done. "Mom," I said, my voice steady and calm. "Do you remember what you texted me yesterday?" She blinked, confused by the question amidst the chaos. "What?" "You texted me that I should eat alone because Becky was crying about flowers. You said those exact words to me. You are not our priority right now." My mother flinched as if I had slapped her. "Well, Mom," I continued, smoothing down my jacket, "I would love to help you. I really would. But Marcus and Becky are criminals. And keeping criminals out of jail is not my priority right now." I turned my back on them. I walked down the stairs of the stage, my heels clicking rhythmically on the floor. I walked past Becky, who was weeping as she was read her rights. I walked past Marcus, who hung his head in shame, unable to look at me. I walked through the stunned crowd of relatives who parted like the Red Sea to let me pass. Nobody said a word. Nobody dared to stop me. I pushed open the double doors and stepped out into the cool night air. The valet was already pulling my Porsche up to the curb. I tipped him $50, got into the leather seat, and put the car in gear. As I drove away, I looked in the rearview mirror one last time. I saw the blue lights flashing against the white columns of the club. I saw the ruins of the family that had tried to break me. And then I turned the corner, and they disappeared from view, leaving only the open road ahead of me. The sun rose over Atlanta the next morning, but there was no warmth for my parents. At exactly 8 o'clock, the Fulton County Sheriff Department pulled up to the curb of the colonial house I owned. They did not come with a warning. They came with a final order. My father opened the door wearing the same wrinkled dress shirt he had worn to the disastrous dinner the night before. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in 10 hours. He tried to block the doorway. He tried to use his authoritative voice, the one he had used to silence me for decades. He told the deputies that this was a misunderstanding, that his daughter was just having a tantrum and would be calling any minute to call this off. The deputy, a large man with no patience for family drama, simply held up the court order. "You have 30 minutes to collect your personal effects and vacate the premises, sir. If you do not comply, we will remove you for trespassing." 30 minutes. 30 years of living in a house, and they had 30 minutes to leave it. The reality finally crashed down on them. They were not the owners. They were not the masters of the castle. They were just guests who had overstayed their welcome. I was not there to see it, but the neighbors told me everything later. They told me how my mother ran through the house in a panic trying to grab everything she could. She tried to take the silver tea set from the dining room, but the deputy stopped her. "That remains with the property, ma'am," he said. "Personal clothing and toiletries only." She tried to take the flat-screen TV from the living room. The deputy stopped her again. "Proof of purchase, ma'am. If you cannot prove you bought it, it stays." She could not prove it. I had bought the TV. I had bought the tea set. I had bought the rugs, the lamps, and the paintings. For the first time they realized that without my checkbook, their lives were empty shells. They ran from room to room, grabbing armfuls of clothes, shoving them into black garbage bags, because they did not even have suitcases. The walk from the front door to the driveway was the longest walk of their lives. The neighborhood had woken up. Mrs. Higgins from across the street was standing on her porch with her arms crossed. The man who lived next door, the one my father always bragged to about his stock portfolio, was watering his lawn, watching the scene unfold with a look of pity mixed with satisfaction. My father could not look at them. He kept his head down, dragging a trash bag full of his old suits across the pavement. The shame was palpable. This was a man who thrived on appearances. He lived for the Sunday morning greetings at church and the respectful nods from the community. Now he was being put out on the curb, like yesterday trash, while the sheriff placed a bright orange padlock on the front door. They stood in the driveway next to their only remaining asset, a rusted 2008 Honda Accord with a cracked windshield. It was the car they used to drive before I bought them the Lexus and the Mercedes. It was the only thing legally registered in their names. They loaded the garbage bags into the trunk. My mother was sobbing quietly, wiping her nose with a tissue. My father slammed the trunk shut and pulled out his phone. He started dialing. I knew exactly who he was calling. He was calling his brother, Uncle George. "George," he said, his voice cracking, "we are in a bit of a bind. Keisha has lost her mind. We need a place to crash for a few days until I get this sorted out with my lawyer." There was a long silence on the other end. Then Uncle George spoke loud enough that my mother could hear it through the receiver. "Do not bring that drama to my house," he said. "I saw the video. I saw that girl Becky calling us monkeys. And I saw you standing there letting her do it. You chose your side, brother. You chose the white girl who hates us over your own daughter who fed you. Do not call me again." The line went dead. My father stared at the phone. He dialed Auntie Bernice. She went straight to voicemail. He called the pastor. The pastor answered, but his voice was cold. "I am praying for you, brother," the pastor said. "But the congregation has seen the footage. It would be very disruptive to have you stay at the parsonage right now. You need to make amends with your daughter before you ask for favors from the church." One by one, the doors closed. The viral video of Becky ranting in my living room had done more than just expose her racism. It had exposed my parents' complicity. They had enabled her. They had defended her against their own flesh and blood. And in the Black community, that kind of betrayal is not easily forgiven. They were radioactive. They sat in the Honda for an hour, just staring at the house they were barred from entering. The orange sticker on the door seemed to mock them. Finally, my father started the engine. It sputtered and coughed before turning over with a cloud of gray smoke. They drove away, not to a hotel because they had no money. Marcus had drained their accounts and I had cut off the allowance. They drove to the only place that does not charge rent. That night, while I sat on the balcony of my penthouse sipping tea and feeling the cool breeze of freedom, my parents pulled into the back corner of a 24-hour Walmart parking lot. My father reclined the driver's seat of the rusted Honda. My mother curled up in the passenger seat, covering herself with a coat because they had forgotten to pack blankets. For the first time in my life, I was not the one losing sleep to keep them comfortable. The silence on my phone was beautiful. They were finally experiencing the world without the cushion of my bank account, and the pavement was harder than they ever imagined. The holding cells at the Fulton County Jail smell of bleach body odor and despair. It is a stark contrast to the lavender-scented air of the country club where my brother and his fiancée had started their evening. I was not there to see it, but my lawyer James obtained the transcripts of their initial interrogations. They painted a pathetic picture of a romance built on greed crumbling under the weight of consequences. As soon as they were separated into different interview rooms, the facade of their united front shattered. Becky did not hesitate for a second. The woman who had sworn to love Marcus forever turned on him before the door even closed. She told the detectives that she was a victim. She claimed that Marcus was controlling and abusive. She said he forced her to wear the stolen jewelry. She said he made her break into my apartment because he owed money to dangerous people, and he was using her as a mule. She cried. She played the fragile white woman in distress, trying to weaponize her tears against a black man in the legal system. She thought it would save her. She thought her privilege was a get-out-of-jail-free card. But the detectives had the video. They had the footage of her calling the shots, of her mocking my family, of her swigging vodka, and leading the raid on my closet. Her lies did not set her free, they just dug her hole deeper. When she realized the tears were not working, she used her one phone call to contact a criminal defense attorney she found on a billboard. She did not call Marcus. She did not ask about him. She left him to rot. Marcus sat in a cell surrounded by real criminals, men who had not grown up in the suburbs, men who did not have a big sister to bail them out of every mistake. He was terrified. His designer suit was wrinkled and stripped of his belt and shoelaces. The golden child was finely tarnished. At 10 o'clock in the morning, my phone rang. The screen displayed a number I did not recognize, but the caller ID said Fulton County Correctional Facility. I sat at my desk looking at the phone. Part of me, the part that had been trained since childhood to be the protector, wanted to ignore it. But another part, the part that was finally healing, needed to hear him beg. I needed to hear the sound of his entitlement breaking. I pressed accept. A robotic voice announced, "You have a collect call from an inmate named Marcus. To accept charges, press 1. I pressed 1. The connection clicked, and I heard heavy breathing on the other end. Keisha. Keisha, are you there? His voice was high-pitched and trembling. He sounded like he was 5 years old again, waking up from a nightmare. I am here, Marcus. Oh, thank God. Keisha, you have to get me out. It is crazy in here. The guys in the cell are looking at me. I cannot stay here. You have to call James. Tell him to post bail. I will pay you back, I swear. I leaned back in my chair, staring out at the city view. How are you going to pay me back, Marcus? You have no job. You have no money. You have debts to loan sharks who are probably looking for you right now. It was Becky, he sobbed. She made me do it, Keisha. She is crazy. She lied about the baby. She lied about everything. I am going to leave her. I promise. I am done with her. Just get me out and I will do whatever you say. I will cut the grass. I will clean your house. Please, Keisha, I am your brother. I am family. Family. That word again. It was the weapon they always used when they needed something. I looked at the calendar on my desk. It was 3 days past my birthday. You know, Marcus, I said, my voice calm and conversational. I realized I never got a gift from you for my birthday. In fact, I did not even get a text. Marcus stammered. I know. I am sorry. I was busy with the wedding planning. I will get you a huge gift when I get out. I promise. Do not worry about it, I said. I decided to give you a gift instead. Since I missed your birthday too, I am giving you something you have desperately needed for 28 years. What? What is it? Is it bail money? No, Marcus. It is the gift of independence. There was a silence on the line. For your entire life, I have been your safety net, I continued. I paid for your college that you quit. I paid for your cars that you crashed. I paid for your apartments that you trashed. I crippled you, Marcus. I made you think that actions do not have consequences. So for your birthday, I am stepping aside. I am letting you be a man. A real man who handles his own problems. Keisha. No, please. Happy belated birthday, Marcus. Good luck with the public defender. I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking slightly, but I felt a massive release of tension in my chest. I had finally cut the cord. I did not give myself time to second guess. I immediately dialed the number for a real estate investment group called We Buy Ugly Houses. They were known for all cash offers and quick closings. They did not care about curb appeal or emotional attachment. A man named Steve answered. "This is Keisha Brooks," I said. "I have a property at 42 Maple Drive. It is vacant. I want to sell it as is. Today." Steve typed something on his keyboard. "I see it. Nice area. What is your asking price?" I named a figure that was 20% below market value. I did not care about maximizing profit. I cared about speed. I wanted that house gone. I wanted the physical anchor that tied me to my parents to be severed before the sun went down. "I can have a cashier check ready by 5 p.m., Steve said, sounding surprised. "Perfect," I said. "Meet me at my lawyer's office." By dinner time, the deed was signed. The keys were handed over. The house where I had been raised, the house where I had been ignored and used, was no longer mine. It belonged to a corporation that would likely bulldoze it and build something new. My parents could not go back. They could not squat. There was no home to return to. The bridge was not just burned, it was demolished. The first week of my brother's incarceration was a masterclass in reality. Marcus had spent his entire adult life believing that consequences were things that happened to other people. He thought that if he smiled charmingly enough, or dropped the right names, the world would bend to his will. But the Fulton County Jail is a place where charm goes to die. Without my money to post bail, he was processed into the general population. The designer suit I had bought him was traded for a faded orange jumpsuit that smelled of industrial detergent and other men's sweat. The high-end sneakers were replaced by cheap canvas slip-ons. Inside the walls, the news traveled fast. Marcus was not just a random inmate. He was the guy who had borrowed $50,000 from Big T, one of the most notorious loan sharks in Atlanta, and then failed to pay. Big T did not need to be physically present to collect his debts. His reach extended through the prison bars like a dark web. On his second night, two men cornered Marcus in the shower block. They did not have a conversation. They did not ask for a payment plan. They simply delivered a message. When the guards found Marcus, he was curled in a fetal position on the wet concrete floor. He had a fractured rib and a swollen eye. But the physical damage was nothing compared to the psychological destruction. For 28 years, Marcus had walked through life with his chest puffed out, pretending to be a boss. He played the part of the successful entrepreneur, posting photos of stacks of cash that were actually rent money I had given him. Now stripped of his props and his protection, he was exposed as exactly what he was: a terrified little boy playing dress-up. He requested protective custody. He requested a transfer. He requested to see a chaplain. For the first time, he was not demanding. He was begging. The golden child who had once thrown a tantrum because his steak was overcooked was now grateful for a tray of lukewarm mystery meat because it meant he was still alive. His fall from grace was absolute. He had lost his freedom, his reputation, and his dignity. The kingdom he thought he ruled had turned out to be a house of cards, and I had pulled the bottom card. While Marcus was learning the hard way that respect is earned and not bought, I was sitting in my office feeling a strange sense of calm. The sale of the house had closed in record time. The money from the sale minus the mortgage payoff and closing costs was sitting in my account. It was a significant sum, but I did not touch it. I planned to donate a large portion of it to a charity that helps young women gain financial literacy. It felt poetic. I thought the war was over. I thought that by selling the house and letting Marcus face justice, I had finally severed the last tentacle of their toxicity. But toxic families are like hydras. You cut off one head and two more grow in its place. Desperation makes people creative. And my parents were nothing if not desperate. On a Tuesday afternoon, my receptionist buzzed me. "There is a process server here for you, Ms. Brooks." I frowned. I assumed it was related to the restraining order I was finalizing against Becky, or perhaps a subpoena for Marcus' trial. I walked out to the lobby and signed for the document. It was a thick packet of legal papers bound in a blue cover. I walked back to my desk and opened it. I scanned the first page and my breath caught in my throat. It was a civil lawsuit. The plaintiffs were listed as Robert and Elaine Brooks. The defendant was Keisha Brooks. I read the cause of action and I had to read it 3 times to believe my eyes. They were suing me under a statute known as filial responsibility. It is an old, rarely used law that exists in some states requiring adult children to provide financial support for their indigent parents. They were claiming that because they were destitute and unable to work, and because I had the financial means, I was legally obligated to pay them a monthly stipend. They were demanding $4,000 a month, the exact amount of the allowance I had cut off. I stared at the paper. The sheer audacity of it was breathtaking. They had been evicted. Their son was in jail. Their daughter-in-law was facing felony charges. And instead of reflecting on their actions, instead of apologizing, instead of finding a job or applying for government assistance, they had found a lawyer shady enough to file a frivolous lawsuit to force me to bankroll them again. They were not suing me because they were starving. They were suing me because they felt entitled to my labor. They looked at my success and saw it as their property. They believed that because they gave birth to me, they owned a percentage of my future. I felt a cold, hard laughter bubbling up in my chest. It was not a happy laugh. It was the laugh of a general who realizes the enemy has just made a fatal tactical error. They thought a lawsuit would scare me. They thought I would settle out of court to avoid the embarrassment. They did not know that I had kept every receipt, every bank statement, and every text message for the last 10 years. They wanted a legal battle. Fine. I would give them a war. The Fulton County Superior Court was a place of sterile walls and fluorescent lighting, a stark contrast to the warmth of the home I had just sold. The air conditioner hummed with a low, aggressive drone that seemed to amplify the tension in the room. I sat at the defendant table next to James, my attorney, whose suit cost more than the car my parents were currently living in. Across the aisle, my parents huddled together. They looked smaller than I remembered. Their clothes were wrinkled and my father was unshaven, a calculated attempt to look pathetic for the court. Beside them sat their lawyer, a man named Mr. Henderson, who I later learned handled mostly traffic tickets and slip and fall cases. He was sweating through his cheap polyester shirt, shuffling papers with nervous hands. When the bailiff announced "All rise," Judge Reynolds entered the room. She was a formidable black woman with silver dreadlocks pulled back into a severe bun and eyes that looked like they could see through concrete. She sat down, arranged her robes, and looked over her reading glasses at the assembly. She did not look impressed. Mr. Henderson stood up to present his opening argument. He tried to project confidence, but his voice cracked. "Your Honor," he began. "My clients Robert and Elaine Brooks are elderly citizens who have been cruelly abandoned by their daughter. They are destitute without housing or income. Under the filial responsibility statutes of this state, we argue that the defendant, Ms. Keisha Brooks, who earns a 7-figure salary, has a legal duty to provide for their basic necessities. She has cast them out onto the street while she lives in luxury." My mother let out a soft, practiced sob, burying her face in a tissue. My father hung his head, shaking it slowly as if he were the victim of a great tragedy. It was a performance they had perfected over years, but Judge Reynolds did not seem moved. She turned her gaze to my table. "Counsel," she said to James, "does your client deny that she has the means to support the plaintiffs?" James stood up. He did not use notes. He did not stutter. He simply picked up a heavy leather-bound binder that was 4 inches thick. "Your Honor, the defense does not deny my client's financial status," James said, his voice smooth and commanding. "However, we vehemently deny the accusation of abandonment. In fact, we move for an immediate dismissal on the grounds that the obligation has already been met. Exceedingly so. He walked to the bench and placed the heavy binder in front of the judge. This binder contains the banking records of Ms. Brooks for the past 10 years, James continued. It details every wire transfer, every credit card payment, and every check written for the benefit of the plaintiffs. Judge Reynolds opened the binder. The room was silent save for the rustling of pages. She ran a manicured finger down the first column of figures. Her eyebrows shot up toward her hairline. Mortgage payments totaling $400,000, she read aloud. Utility bills, medical insurance, a lease for a 2023 Lexus, a lease for a Mercedes, bail bonds, legal fees. She flipped a few pages forward, her frown deepening. Vacations to Jamaica and Hawaii, designer clothing, cash allowances. She looked up at James. What is the total figure, counselor? $1.5 million, Your Honor, James said. To be precise, $1,542,000 invested in the plaintiffs over the last decade. The courtroom gasped. Even the bailiff looked surprised. Mr. Henderson, the parents' lawyer, looked at the binder and then at his clients with a look of horror. He had clearly not been told about the money. He thought he was fighting a case of neglect, not a case of gluttony. Judge Reynolds stared at the page for a long moment, then slowly closed the binder. The sound of the heavy cover hitting the wood echoed like a gavel strike. She turned her eyes to my parents. The look on her face was not pity. It was pure, unadulterated disgust. Mr. and Mrs. Brooks, stand up, she ordered. My parents scrambled to their feet. My father tried to straighten his collar, but his hands were shaking too hard. You filed a lawsuit claiming poverty, the judge said, her voice low and dangerous. You claimed your daughter abandoned you, yet the evidence shows she has given you more money in 10 years than most people earn in a lifetime. You drove luxury cars, you lived in a house you did not pay for, and you took vacations on her dime, and when she finally set a boundary, your response was to sue her. But, Your Honor, my father stammered. She stopped. That is the point. We have nothing now. You have nothing because you squandered everything, Judge Reynolds snapped, cutting him off. This court is not a bank, and your daughter is not an ATM. The statute you cited is designed to protect parents who are destitute through no fault of their own. It is not designed to fund the entitlement of parents who refuse to manage their own lives. She banged her gavel. Case dismissed with prejudice. This means you cannot refile. Furthermore, I am ordering the plaintiffs to pay the full legal fees of the defendant. My mother wailed. We have no money. How can we pay? Then I suggest you get jobs, Judge Reynolds said coldly, gathering her papers. There is a labor shortage. I am sure someone is hiring. She stood up to leave but paused. She looked at me for a brief second with a nod of respect before turning her gaze back to my parents. Her final words hung in the air long after she left the bench. You two should be ashamed of yourselves. You raised a brilliant, successful daughter who tried to give you the world. And instead of thanking her, you tried to bleed her dry. You do not deserve her. The sentencing hearing for Rebecca Miller was the final nail in the coffin of the life my brother thought he was building. The detectives had dug deep, and what they found was not just a one-time lapse in judgment. It was a lifestyle. They uncovered a history of credit card fraud spanning 3 states and identity theft schemes targeting the elderly. The stolen Birkin bag and the necklace were just the tip of the iceberg. Standing before the judge in a beige prison jumpsuit, Becky looked nothing like the arrogant woman who had sneered at my family in my living room. Her roots had grown out, and her face was washed clean of makeup, revealing a hardness that she usually kept hidden. The judge sentenced her to 3 years in a state penitentiary, followed by 5 years of probation. When the gavel came down, she did not scream. She just slumped forward as if the puppet strings holding her up had finally been cut. Marcus was spared a prison sentence, but his punishment was perhaps even more fitting for a man who had never worked a day in his life. He accepted a plea deal that required him to pay full restitution to the victims of his check fraud, including the loan sharks who were still watching him closely. To make the payments, he had to take the only job he could get with a felony record. My brother, the aspiring entrepreneur who refused to drive anything less than a Mercedes, was now waking up at 4 in the morning to hang off the back of a sanitation truck. He lives in a basement studio apartment in a neighborhood where he used to be afraid to even stop for gas. I saw him once from a distance while I was stopped at a red light. He was wearing a neon yellow vest, lifting heavy bags of trash into the crusher. He looked 20 years older. The arrogance was gone, replaced by the hollow look of a man who realizes too late that the world owes him nothing. As for my parents, their descent was quieter, but no less tragic. Without a home, without assets, and having alienated every member of our extended family, they became wards of the state. They were placed in a government-funded nursing facility on the outskirts of the city. It was not the kind of place with garden walks and bridge clubs. It was a gray concrete building that smelled of industrial cleaner and boiled cabbage. They share a room with 2 other residents separated only by thin curtains. I decided to visit them exactly one time. I needed to see it for myself, to ensure that the guilt I had carried for so long was truly gone. I walked down the linoleum hallway, listening to the beeping of monitors and the murmuring of televisions. I found them in room 304. My father was sitting in a wheelchair by the window staring at a brick wall. My mother was sitting on the edge of her bed folding a thin hospital blanket over and over again. When I stepped into the room, they both looked up. For a second, a spark of hope lit up their eyes. They thought I was there to sign the papers. They thought I was there to move them into a luxury condo. My mother started to stand up, reaching out her hands. "Keisha," she whispered. "You came back." I did not step forward. I did not hug them. I did not ask how they were. I simply walked to the small bedside table and placed a wicker basket filled with apples and oranges on it. Next to the fruit, I placed a folded piece of paper. My mother stopped moving, sensing that this was not a rescue mission. I turned around and walked to the door. "Wait, Keisha." My father called out, his voice weak and raspy. "Where are you going?" I paused at the threshold, but I did not look back. I knew that if I looked at them, I might feel pity, and pity was a luxury I could no longer afford. I walked out of the facility and into the bright sunlight of the parking lot. Back in the room, my mother unfolded the note with trembling hands. It was short. It read simply, "This fruit basket is the final priority I have for you. Goodbye." 6 months have passed since I walked out of that nursing home, leaving behind a basket of fruit and a lifetime of obligation. The view from my terrace in Santorini is a painting of white stone against the endless blue of the Aegean Sea. The air here smells of salt and wild thyme, a stark difference from the sterile scent of the courtroom or the suffocating humidity of Atlanta. I am still the CFO of my company, but I run my operations remotely now. I start my mornings with a swim instead of a panic attack. I review contracts with a clear mind, no longer wondering if my phone is about to ring with another emergency, another demand, or another guilt trip. I sold everything in Atlanta. The penthouse where Becky and Marcus violated my sanctuary is gone. The cars are gone. I liquidated every physical asset that tied me to that city and to the people who inhabited it. I realized that those things were not just possessions. They were trophies I had bought trying to prove to my parents that I was worthy of their love. I thought if I bought enough houses, enough cars, and enough expensive dinners, they would finally see me. I was wrong. You cannot buy vision for the willfully blind. Here in Greece, I am just Keisha. I met a man named Julian a few weeks ago. He is a local architect who restores old windmills. He does not know my net worth. He does not know that I can buy his entire firm with a signature. On our first date, we went to a small tavern by the water. When the check came, I instinctively reached for my wallet. It was a reflex honed by decades of being the provider. Julian gently stopped my hand. He smiled and said that he invited me so he would take care of it. It was such a small gesture, a 20-euro lunch. But I went to the bathroom and cried. It was the first time in my adult life that someone had treated me not as a resource to be mined, but as a woman to be courted. I am learning to be loved for who I am, not for what I can provide. It is a slow process unwiring the programming of a lifetime. But every day the voice of my mother gets quieter in my head. Every day the ghost of my father's disapproval fades a little more into the Mediterranean mist. People often say that blood is thicker than water. They use that phrase like a weapon to chain us to toxic relationships, to guilt us into enduring abuse, because we share DNA. But I have learned a hard truth. Blood can be toxic. Blood can carry disease. And when a part of your body becomes gangrenous, you do not keep it attached simply because it is part of you. You cut it off. You sever the connection to save the rest of the body. It is painful and the recovery is long, but it is the only way to survive. I lost a mother, a father, and a brother this year. To the outside world that sounds like a tragedy. But as I sit here watching the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and violet, I do not feel tragic. I feel light. I feel whole. I lost a family that never truly existed, but I found the one person I had neglected for far too long, myself. Thank you for listening to my story. I know there are many of you out there who are still in the trenches, still writing checks. You cannot afford, still swallowing insults at family dinners, hoping that this time will be different. I want you to know that you are not crazy, and you are not selfish. You are worthy of love that does not come with an invoice. If you have ever had to make the difficult choice to cut ties with a toxic family member to save your own sanity, I want to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share your journey. Let us build a community of survivors who chose themselves. Please like this video and subscribe for more stories of resilience. Remember, your first priority is you. Keisha's journey is a powerful reminder that family is defined by behavior, not biology. We often cling to toxic relationships out of guilt, believing that loyalty means enduring abuse. But the greatest lesson here is that you cannot buy love, and you certainly cannot save people who are committed to their own destruction. True love does not require you to bankrupt your soul or your bank account. Setting boundaries is not an act of betrayal. It is an act of necessary self-preservation. You are allowed to walk away from anyone who makes you feel small, even if you share a last name. If this story gave you the courage to finally put yourself first, please hit the like button and subscribe to our channel for more stories of resilience and justice.